is Techstrong TV.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Jeremy Ventura. Jeremy is ThreatX Field CISO. Welcome, Jeremy. Good to be talking with you.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me on today. Look forward to the conversation.
Me too. We're talking about APIs and security, lots of great things. Before we do that, just tell folks a little bit about yourself. Also, tell them a little bit about ThreatX.
Okay, absolutely. So as you mentioned, name is Jeremy Ventura. I've been with ThreatX now for just about a year and a half, but I'm currently the field CISO. So I'm responsible for thought leadership, meeting with our customers and prospects at a senior level executive reach from CISOs to CIOs, and really being a trusted advisor, consultant at many different times and days, and making sure that our customers are always happy with our products, and always having a forward-looking thought process of where's this market going? How can us as ThreatX as a company always provide better services? But a little bit about ThreatX. We've been around actually coming up on a decade now, started in 2014. We are a managed API and application security company. And we provide a solution for our customers and prospects around the world that helps them really protect against some of the API threats we've seen out there, like credential stuffing, SQL injection, but also really looking at it from a botnet perspective, DDoS protection, and even now with recent news into our newest feature and capability in runtime protection. So really getting a comprehensive visibility and view into your APIs and applications.
And given the landscape of applications, architectures, cloud native, but even just, edge applications, the attack surface is, I think, wider and deeper. I mean, the surface is just going in all directions, and it's tough to keep track of it. So you've got to have somebody you can work with that can move with you and also move with the attack surface.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think, that's one of the things we hear all the time is just how that attack surface is ever expanding. Even from the back in the days of, it feels like COVID was so long ago, but really, 2020 coming up on 3-4 years ago, where organizations moved to this, hybrid workforce, or this digital transformation as they coined it. And we saw applications move to the cloud. We've seen APIs being more leveraged by developers and engineers. And so that, to your point, has just really, increased usage means increased risk for a lot of these organizations as well. So that's kind of why we're in business today.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about parts of that attack surface. Obviously, people are going multi-cloud. They're also pushing applications to the edge, in many cases, even onto devices that may not be fully connected all the time, whether it be cars or platforms like that. But, the edge has become a big part of it. Of course, APIs used to be sort of the crunchy hard surface to get in and out of applications. Now API is the application, and sometimes it's not even clear when things are going inside or out. So talk to us a little bit about the kind of concerns customers come to you about.
Yeah. ThreatX and kind of where we've played traditionally has always been that layer 7, which for those who are not familiar with is the application layer and the OSI model. So we're looking at HTTPS traffic. So looking at that, what we call ingress traffic. So what is actually hitting your application from a public facing external perspective? What is happening to that application? Is it somebody trying to do damage to your website? Or is it somebody that's trying to infiltrate maybe a development application that hasn't yet released to production? And so we've always played in that space. And so customers traditionally will come to us and say, we've been hit with things like I mentioned before, but credential stuffing, especially when we think about credit unions, financial institutions, think about username and passwords. If I can get into your banking account or your banking login website, I can do a lot of damage, right? Whether it's stealing funds or causing damage to yourself. And so we've seen a lot of different approaches and needs for ThreatX from the aspect of looking at some of that, what we call the OWASP top 10, which is a lot of those different types of attacks we've talked about, programmatic access, SQL injection, even going back to, we've seen a lot of this, especially in the last 12 months here with DDoS attacks. So again, staying at the application layer of, is my website or my applications being pounded by botnets, for example, trying to deface my website? For whatever the purpose might be, whether it's political, whether it's financial, whether it's reputational damage. So we've seen that traditionally, and that's kind of where the space we played in. But where we've seen this progression, I think you can look at this just in the space in general, is we've seen applications And then it's kind of, to your point, it's kind of moved to, well, how do applications communicate? How do they talk via API? When we think about the APIs in general, a lot of these APIs hold a lot of data. That could be sensitive data, that could be data, PII data, that could be even credit card information, PCI data, for example. And so depending on your organization, depending on the business you're in, those APIs are really what I like to call the connected tissue of how really you're driving revenue, you're driving operations, especially if you have applications that can go and integrate with other solutions, or you want to integrate with other service providers out there. Typically, those connections are made via API. Those API is really the glue. And so protecting them, getting visibility into that is super, super vital and important for organizations. So that's a lot of it where organizations say, we know we're using APIs and applications. We don't know how many we have. We don't know if they're being attacked unless it's something serious. And then how do we go and protect that? And so that's a lot of the challenges that we are helping solve for our customers.
Yeah, I like how you've evolved, with the times, of course, but, being kind of web application security. And then you kind of, I think on your website, I saw, and APIs, because that is the connective tissue, right, of applications, whether it's our own or to third-party services. I assume you're talking about RESTful calls, right, over HTTP that you're looking at. Talk about, so how do you protect that? Do you do anything different for APIs versus normal HTTP traffic?
Yeah, so I think our kind of sticking point, or kind of what makes us different in the market, is a lot of vendors traditionally have been focused on what we call the shift left side. So really incorporating security part of your build process. So incorporating that in your CI/CD or your SDLC, software development lifecycle. So really, how does security become a test or a hook into that pipeline, so you're protecting your applications, your code, before it actually pushes to production? And I will say, right, take my vendor hat off. That's super, super important. Where we play is a little bit more on the right-hand side, which is actually looking at real-time or runtime protection. And so that is where we found kind of our bread and butter, is our sticking point is, while it's great to incorporate the security provisionings and checks part of development, you also need to protect what's actually in production. So what is my website doing? What are the actual calls that are being run? What happens when I execute a command and now a container or a node is spun up and now the application's running, for example? And so our kind of unique and kind of secret sauce here is we don't look at it from a signature standpoint. And that's a lot of the traditional legacy tools out there, especially in the web application firewall, where they're looking based upon patterns of what they know is to be good or bad. And as we know, attackers are way more sophisticated now than ever. They're using IP addresses and other different types of attributions and characteristics to evade detection. And legacy solutions aren't keeping up. So our kind of unique sauce here is we're looking at this from a behavioral signature standpoint. So what that means is really correlating massive amounts of data to say, this is who, what, when, why, and this is how they're doing it. So really correlating it back to what we call a threat actor or threat entity, and then watching that pattern over time based upon all that data that we can analyze sitting at that layer 7 from that HTTPS level. Now, where that's also gone, though, and kind of some of the new exciting things that ThreatX has just announced a couple of months ago, and we're about to go GA now, is with our runtime protection. So really adding another functionality and capability. Really, it's another deployment method. So instead of looking at HTTPS and kind of that as a reverse proxy, we're now allowing organizations to deploy kind of at the kernel level. It's leveraging a technology called eBPF, Extended Berkeley Packet Filtering. And traditionally, we see a lot of EDR, endpoint detection response products and companies leverage this, but we're using this, and this is going to allow us to look at the actual NUSTR or the CLOD. So looking at it from the actual kernel level to see, what is the network monitoring? What are the system calls? Are there any OS level protections or commands that are being run? And the perfect example of that, which we've seen, which caused massive headaches for organizations in the years past, still today, is Log4j. Everyone remembers Log4j, and when that happened and all the different variants of vulnerabilities and exploits that kind of spun off that. And a lot of organizations didn't know where it was. Am I running Log4j? Am I running this library? Is it running in production? Is it in a development? And so this runtime solution presented by ThreatX is really going to help organizations when it comes to a lot of the things we talked about, like 0 days, east-west traffic, insider threat. Again, because it's looking at kernel level and kind of that OS level protection.
Yeah, it's interesting to see it evolve back to the Linux kernel level. I remember doing some work early on in vulnerability and intrusion inspection, and a lot of the issue was just handling the traffic load. of trying to be that gateway or that firewall or whatever it might have been. And by operating at the kernel level, you reduce the number of system calls. You're seeing things as they happen, not as they're transmitted, right? So you're not working at wire speed, you're working at computer speed.
Exactly. Yep. I also like to kind of use the analogy of if you think about it almost like a house. Traditionally, where the world is played, including ThreatX and our products and services, is really the perimeter, the edge of the house. So whether that means you're putting up a fence, or you might have a security guard outside if you're really rich or famous, but it's protecting you from the outside of intruders trying to come in. But what we've always kind of just lacked in visibility and protection in the industry in general was what happens if an attacker was already inside, or what happens if you have an insider threat. Maybe it's a disgruntled engineer that's unfortunately getting laid off, and they decide to put malicious malware in a new product that is going to be delivered. And that individual leaves, and 3 weeks later, when the new coders or developers are ready to push that to production, they click execute, and there's malware now spun off right from an insider threat. So this is really taking a look not just at the fence and the perimeter, but also imagine having the security cameras and a bouncer walking inside the house with you every room you go. So it's really extending the protection from edge all the way to runtime as well.
Very good. One of the challenges always in security in a SOC, for example, is just dealing with the amount of alerts and information that you're gathering. And of course, there's tons of information you have access to, right? In what you do at ThreatX. How do you help manage that to make it so that the engineers, the SOC engineers, where it might be, sort of work on the things that are really important and relevant, as opposed to, chasing things down that may not turn out to be an issue they should have spent their time on?
Yeah, so really it comes down to two big kind of unique differentiators. The first one, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's really about that data correlation. As you know, especially if you're a Fortune 100 company and you've got a huge online presence, which most of them do, imagine the amount of volume of alerts that are coming in. You need to be able to kind of comb through that and find the needle in the haystack. What do I need to focus on as a SOC engineer, an analyst, or incident response team first? What is most vital and important based upon my business and my applications and what that means for me? And so really the concept there is we do everything based upon a risk score. So that risk score can change depending on your application, depending on your organization, depending on, again, the business use case and the need of what you're actually protecting. So let's say a risk score is set to a threshold of 70, and we see different attributions or characteristics that are coming in that sets that rule, it sets that threshold to a 75. Organizations could then say, I want to automatically block that request. I want to automatically do something, maybe blacklist it, whitelist it, blacklist it, for example. And so with that concept being said, it really helps organizations kind of fine tune what to prioritize and what to focus on first. That's from a technology standpoint. The second part is you kind of mentioned it right there, but a lot of organizations, especially in API application security, they don't have the resources to look at all the different alerts and the logging and even set up the tool or platform. So ThreatX actually provides what we call a protection as a service, which is a 24/7, 365 managed service, managed SOC that you can leverage any way you want. We've seen organizations leverage us doing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, complete incident response, have full capabilities to block. We've also seen some organizations say, we have a 300-person SOC team. We would just love you guys to do maybe some rule configuration or some QA when we want to implement some type of new functionality within the platform. So it really helps kind of get the tailored approach, but the comprehensiveness of the entire suite, from the technology all the way to allowing organizations to use us from a managed security operations as well.
I'm curious, do folks ever do kind of a hybrid approach? Some of it they monitor themselves, some of it they hand off to you to handle. I can imagine there'd be certain things they want to handle themselves, but they don't have to handle the universe of everything happening in their applications. Yeah,
absolutely. I would say probably majority is probably 60% fall in that bucket, where it's some type of hybrid approach where we might be doing tier 1. And then if we see something that is getting close to that risk threshold again, we'll send alerts and notifications into any existing tooling, or even sometimes it's still sometimes old school. We'll call them right up and we'll say, hey, we've seen this a threat actor coming in trying to infiltrate your application. We've alerted it. We've kind of put the provisions in place. Here you go, because they might be tier 2 as well. But yeah, it definitely the nice thing about it is every organization can customize how they want to leverage our services based upon their needs.
I'd love to hear a little bit about, part of The great thing about field engineers, field CTOs, field CISOs is you're working with customers all the time. So you get to experience a little bit of what they experience implementing the product, using the product or service, whatever it is. Talk a little bit about that adoption step of what it takes to start using ThreatX. Is this a turn it on, send traffic here, and you start seeing things, or is it more involved than that? I'm being oversimplistic. It's probably more involved than that. But what does it take to kind of get up and running and starting to see value?
Yeah, so we definitely like to call it the white glove treatment. And I think that's kind of in combination that our security operations team is the actual team that's actually helping you do the onboarding and the deployment, getting your applications online, whether you're using kind of the reverse proxy traditional ThreatX approach or even the runtime approach, we're there step in step. So our security operations team are experts in web application firewalls, API security, runtime protection, which is super nice to have for organizations that need those types of resources. But typically, onboarding can last, depending on the organization, depending on, of course, how many applications, APIs you have. Typically, onboarding is simply between 2 and 3 weeks. Of course, that can fluctuate and that can have a lot of different variables depending on organizations' needs and requirements. But in general, though, one of the best things we've heard from our organizations and our customers alike is this whole set it and forget it approach, where a lot of organizations can say, you know what? We've set it up. We've done the onboarding deployment. Things are firing. The alerts are going. And because they're leveraging our security operations, some of our customers don't even log into our product, which is kind of also a nice kind of benefit to have, especially relying on the ThreatX security operations team expertise to handle those incidents and alerts that are coming into your organization. So onboarding typically 2 to 3 weeks, but our whole approach is that white glove treatment where you can get your nights and weekends back. And that's our kind of our marketing slogan that we use, but we've had a lot of customers come back and say that's reality, which is awesome to hear.
There's value right there.
Absolutely.
So I've held off as long as I can. I have to ask the AI question. What kind of questions are you getting from customers about as they're looking at or they're implementing or they're using services that all might use AI, machine learning, or most recently generative AI has got a lot of attention. Kind of what do you see? How do you see that changing the approach people might take, or maybe amplifying what they're already doing with ThreatX?
Yeah, absolutely. We get the question a lot. Of course, it's hot right now in the times we live in, especially to your point with generative AI and all the other open source and kind of even paid for solutions that are coming out to market here. One of the biggest questions is just the very basic one. How do we look at AI? A lot of my role, as well as you mentioned before, is being in the field. That's hence the field CISO point. So I get to travel worldwide. We have customers globally, and it's really interesting to hear different perspectives in the UK versus the Middle East versus the United States, and kind of what different regulatory bodies are doing to protect AI, to incorporate AI in solutions, and how is that going to be developed securely. A lot of the things that we hear right now is how do we take a lot of that data and continue to kind of, again, prioritize the alerts. So really making sure that you're focused on the things that are most necessity to your organization, or that includes the highest risk to your application. So how can I leverage AI to kind of automate, orchestrate a lot of that and really cut through the noise? I think that's a lot of it. But taking my kind of AI and application and API security hat off, in general, I get asked about AI just a lot. And I think for organizations where I work for a lot of security vendors. I've been in this space for a while, and a lot of vendors say they use AI. Oh yeah, we have AI, and that we go to Black Hat, RSA, and almost every vendor right now is saying, oh yeah, we use AI. No matter what, my advice and recommendations for senior leaders and CISOs working internally, when you hear that, make sure you're really doing the stress testing on those vendors, no matter what space it's in, whether it's EDR or SIM or APIs or ticketing systems, whatever it might be. Really stress test those companies, really figure out how are they actually incorporating AI, how are they incorporating it within their own internal processes, how they continue to develop, make sure it's secure. That's also, being from a cybersecurity aspect, that's super, super important because marketing can say the tool and vendor uses AI, but really, really test it out and make sure it works for your organization.
Yeah, I think particularly with generative AI, being it's a relatively new topic. I mean, it's really just been a little over a year ago since most of us learned about it, right? Sort of the data going into those models and data protection, and how do we know we're not sending things outside or if we're training models ourselves, make sure that that doesn't leak into, more base models that are publicly available. Seems like, I don't know if it's a greenfield, but there's a lot of opportunities for companies like ThreatX to really help customers understand what's happening and how to protect when that does happen.
Absolutely. I think in the API space in general, API and application space, there's a lot of leeway, I think, for organizations to incorporate AI effectively in their products, to not overdo it, but also to make sure that they're leveraging it in the best responsibility. So absolutely. I think in cybersecurity in general, kind of going back to the marketing foe there, there's a lot of room for AI to accurately and effectively help organizations. So I think we're just scratching the surface there, and we got a long way to go, but it is definitely an exciting time.
Great. Where can folks find out more about ThreatX? Maybe get a demo, get engaged, start seeing the product and the service.
Absolutely. So anyone can go right now on ThreatX.com. You can actually sign up for trials. You can get a demo, a request form right there. In addition, a little plug, I also have a podcast called Exploring Cybersecurity that can be found right on the ThreatX page under podcasts, where we deep dive into all aspects of cybersecurity news and trends and bring on guests from all different avenues and walks of life. But yeah, ThreatX.com, where you can find all your information on demoing and all our products and services that I mentioned.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Jeremy Ventura, who is a field CISO with ThreatX. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
You bet.